As Shaquille O'Neal's daughter Shirley walks home after hanging out with her friends, three racist gang members follow her. When they catch up, they attack her, and one of them pulls out a lighter, setting her hair on fire. They have no idea they just messed with the daughter of one of the most dangerous people in the world. Now they're about to face their worst nightmare. Subscribe and like this video to see how the story unfolds. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Shirley O'Neal, the 21-year-old daughter of the legendary Shaquille O'Neal, had just finished having coffee with her friends. She stepped out of a trendy cafe, her curly black hair bouncing under the sunlight as she adjusted her purse. Shirley wasn't just her father's daughter. She had his strength, his confidence, and his fearless spirit. As she walked toward the street, humming a tune, she didn't notice the three men standing near a parked black motorcycle. Their eyes were locked on her like predators watching their prey. Andrew, Rogan, and Thomas, three racist gang members who made it their mission to terrorize anyone who didn't look like them, especially people of color. "She's one of them," Andrew muttered, nudging Rogan. His voice dripped with hate. Rogan smirked, his lips curling into a sneer. His eyes glowed with something cruel as he flipped open a lighter with a sharp click. "Let's give her a reason to run," he said, his voice slithering like a snake. His fingers tightened around the lighter as his eyes flickered toward the motorcycle, already plotting his next move. Shirley, completely unaware of the danger, stood at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Her heart beat calmly, in sync with the blinking signal. Then Andrew crept up behind her, his footsteps quiet but filled with evil intent. And Rogan, fueled by pure hatred, held up the lighter. Its small flame danced in the afternoon breeze, glowing like a warning. In a split second, the fire caught Shirley's hair. A burning sensation tore through her scalp, and before she could react, the sickening smell of burning hair filled the air. The flames, small but fierce, climbed through her curls, eating away at them like a hungry beast. The peaceful afternoon shattered. Shirley's world flipped upside down. A piercing scream ripped through the street. Shirley spun around, her eyes wide with terror, her hands flying to her head. The bystanders gasped in horror. Some froze, unable to believe what they were seeing. Others, their instincts kicking in, rushed forward, desperate to help. The nightmare had begun. One man, his face twisted with both horror and sympathy, took off his jacket and threw it over Shirley's head, smothering the flames with the fabric. The fire, once burning wildly, was gone in an instant, leaving behind only smoke and the awful smell of burned hair. The damage was clear, like a cruel mark left behind by a monster. Shirley's beautiful, flowing hair, something she had always been proud of, was now nothing but a burned, smoldering mess. The soft curls she once loved were gone, replaced by a painful reminder of what had just happened. The gang members, showing no remorse, laughed loudly, their voices sharp and cruel. "Guess she won't be showing off that hair anymore," Rogan sneered, his words dripping with mockery, as if her suffering was just entertainment for him. Andrew, his cold grin as heartless as winter itself, added to the cruelty. "Yeah, maybe next time she'll stay where she belongs," he said, his words poisoned with hate and arrogance. His eyes burned with the same blind rage as a wild, rabid dog. The bystanders, frozen by shock and disbelief, stood in silence. The street, once full of life, now felt empty. Like it, too, had witnessed something too horrible to ignore. The silence hung over the scene like a heavy, suffocating blanket, trapping the pain and anger in the air. What would you do if Shirley was your daughter? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Then, breaking through the heavy silence, a single voice rose. It was strong, filled with unshakable courage, cutting through the moment like a bolt of lightning. "Who did this?" the voice roared. The words weren't just a question, they were a command, shaking the very ground beneath them. The crowd instinctively moved aside, parting like a wave. And in the center of it all, a figure stepped forward, his presence more powerful than a storm, more unstoppable than nature itself. There he was, Shaquille O'Neal, the legend himself. His eyes burned like twin volcanoes erupting, filled with furious intensity. His jaw was locked tight like a diamond-hard symbol of determination. His body, pure power and athleticism, stood tall, a force of nature. The legendary basketball player, a former NBA champion, was here. As if driven by a force beyond himself, Shaquille O'Neal stood in the middle of the street, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His whole body was stiff with barely contained fury. His jaw, as solid as a bunker wall, was set with unshakable will. Shirley, despite the burns and scars that marked her, was still breathtaking. She turned to face her father, tears glistening in her eyes like precious gems. "Dad," she whispered, her voice a mix of relief and pain, as if her words could somehow heal the wounds in front of her. Shaquille O'Neal, a titan of conviction, didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He barely seemed to breathe as his sharp, piercing gaze shifted from his daughter to the ones responsible for her suffering. Rogan and Andrew, who had once basked in their cruelty, now shrank back. Their faces turned pale as fear gripped them. Their usual arrogant swagger was gone. Now they stood frozen under Shaq's icy, unrelenting stare. Their legs felt like lead, unable to move. And in that moment, they realized just how badly they had messed up. They had no idea who Shirley was, but they were about to find out. They didn't know that Shirley O'Neal wasn't just any girl. She was Shaquille O'Neal's daughter. A man who had dominated the basketball court, a legend whose reputation was as fierce and unstoppable as the charge of a raging bull. They had made a terrible mistake. Shaquille O'Neal's voice was low and controlled, but every word was packed with barely contained power. His words fell like heavy stones on Rogan and Andrew, their faces now twisted with fear. "We were just messing around, old man," Rogan stammered, his bravado crumbling. His voice, once cocky and full of arrogance, now dribbled out like a weak, pitiful excuse. Shaquille O'Neal was not impressed. His expression didn't change. His face was like a stone gargoyle, cold, unshaken, and filled with silent fury. Then, in the blink of an eye, his rage exploded. Like a cobra striking, Shaquille O'Neal moved. His fists lashed out like bolts of lightning, cutting through the space between him and his enemies. The former NBA king roared to life like a mighty volcano erupting. His body burned with the fire of revenge. His punches landed like a raging tornado, unstoppable and devastating. Boom! The first punch hit Rogan's stomach with the force of an earthquake. The impact sent him flying backward, crashing into a parked car with a sickening thud. The sound echoed through the streets, a brutal, undeniable knockout. But before Andrew could recover from the shock of Rogan's defeat, Shaquille O'Neal, like a legendary warrior, threw an uppercut so powerful it felt like doom itself. His fist smashed into Andrew's jaw like a hammer hitting an anvil, lifting the gang member off the ground like a rag doll. Andrew crashed onto the pavement, his body limp and motionless, as if all life had been drained from him. The bystanders stood frozen, their eyes wide with shock, their mouths hanging open. But before they could even find the words to react, a gasp of horror burst from their throats, a wave of fear and awe spreading through the crowd like a tidal wave. Rogan, his body aching like he had been beaten senseless, struggled to his feet. His balance was as shaky as a pile of cardboard boxes in the wind. He reached out blindly, his hands grasping at the air for support. His vision blurred with pain, his mind clouded with fear. He swayed like a small boat caught in a hurricane, each breath a painful effort as he tried to regain control of his body. Like a predator closing in on its prey, Shaquille O'Neal moved toward Rogan, his massive figure radiating pure fury. His shadow stretched over Rogan like the claws of a deadly beast. "You like playing with fire, huh?" he growled, his voice cold and sharp, sending chills down Rogan's spine. The words sliced through the tense silence like a blade. In pure desperation, Rogan's eyes darted around wildly. His whole body trembled as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. But against Shaquille O'Neal's towering presence, the weapon looked like nothing more than a toy. A grave mistake. Shaquille O'Neal moved faster than a striking viper. Before Rogan could even react, Shaq grabbed his wrist mid-air, his grip as unbreakable as steel. Then, with a brutal twist, he wrenched Rogan's arm. Snap! The sickening sound tore through the night like a gunshot. Rogan's scream followed, raw and piercing, echoing down the street, a sound the city would never forget. Shaquille O'Neal's eyes burned with rage. His breath came in deep, steady bursts filled with righteous anger. He leaned in, his voice a deadly whisper dripping with venom. "You don't hurt my family. Ever." His words were final, like the toll of a bell marking doom. And then, with one last devastating right hook, Shaquille O'Neal, the Avenger, delivered his final blow. His fist crashed into Rogan's face with unstoppable force, like the judgment of the heavens themselves. Boom! Rogan's body slammed onto the concrete. He lay sprawled out, limbs lifeless like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His consciousness was completely gone, wiped away by the sheer power of the punch. Then came the sirens. Police cars skidded to a halt, their tires screeching like wild horses brought to an abrupt stop. Their flashing lights painted the street in a swirl of blue and red, illuminating the massive figure of Shaquille O'Neal. He stood tall, a living monument to justice. As officers rushed in, one of them, a man who had seen many battles but never one like this, turned to Shaquille O'Neal. His gaze shifted between the fallen gang members and the towering giant before him. His voice, heavy with curiosity and uncertainty, carried the weight of a man trying to solve a puzzle no one had ever dared to put together. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice strong and commanding, like a judge making a final decision. Shaquille O'Neal, still standing tall with strength and honor, wiped the sweat from his forehead. It rolled down his face like a river, proof of the justice he had delivered. "They played with fire," Shaquille O'Neal said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "And they got burned." His words echoed through the streets like cannon blasts, sharp and final. The police officers, understanding the weight of his words, nodded seriously. The lead officer, his sharp eyes locked onto the criminals, gave his order with the confidence of a battle-hardened leader. "Take them away," he commanded, his voice sealing the fate of the beaten gang members like a judge slamming a gavel. As the police cuffed the unconscious criminals, the crowd erupted into applause. Their admiration for Shaquille O'Neal filled the air like a victory song. Shirley O'Neal, still shaking from the shock and anger, lifted her teary eyes to her father. Her voice was soft but filled with pain. "Dad, mama, my hair," she whispered, the loss of her locks cutting deep, like a cruel insult. Shaquille O'Neal, his heart swelling with fatherly love, pulled her into a strong embrace. His arms, like a fortress, shielded her from the cold cruelty of racism. "It'll grow back, baby," he whispered, his voice as calm as a flowing stream. "But those cowards, they'll never get their pride back." Like stars shining in the night sky, true strength comes from the goodness within. Hate may try to divide us, but courage and resolve will always stand against it. As long as heroes like Shaquille O'Neal and Shirley exist, the light of justice will never fade. Stand up, speak out, protect the ones you love. If you enjoyed this video, share it with your loved ones. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories.